Hello guys, Winston here. A couple months ago, my friends and I went to New York Comic Con to bathe in the culture of all things media. If you're familiar with what goes on at events like these, you'll know that one of the things people like to do at Comic Con is dress up in some way, shape, or form. It could be as simple as a nerdy t-shirt or as complex as, well, there really is no limit. I generally like to show a tiny bit of geek pride and do something for Comic Con with the one rule that it can't inhibit my mobility. I have to be able to get it and my camera gear into the city via public transportation, plus a change of clothing if I'm spending the night in the city. So I place a fairly high value on something being lightweight and compact. As some of you might know, I built my own Iron Man arc reactor prop a couple years ago to wear to Comic Con and for Halloween. It was entirely crafted by hand and I thought it looked pretty good at the time, but I knew it was wildly inaccurate because I lacked the tools necessary to make it right. My dimensions, my materials, they were all compromises. In my defense, everywhere I looked, the vast majority of people who made their own arc reactors seemed to have deviated in major ways from the original movie prop. But after months of listening to Adam Savage explaining in podcasts why the pursuit of perfection was so enjoyable to him, I decided I should revisit my original arc reactor project since I now happen to have a CNC milling machine at my disposal. There were so many features on it I'd be able to fabricate to higher standards. After about 2 seconds of googling, however, I decided to start from scratch. Absolutely nothing from my original arc reactor was worth saving. My primary torus was too thick and chunky, my coil windings let light through, and everything else was just too ugly to show off. Plus, with better material selection, I could make the entire arc reactor stack thinner and lighter while retaining the major cosmetic features of the movie prop. The planning process for this project began several weeks before I cut anything. It basically entailed brainstorming designs in the shower and sketching them in a notepad during my free time. The defining feature of the arc reactor is a clear backlit ring of approximately 80mm in diameter if the R.P.F's research is to be believed. I rounded it up to 3.25 inches to be a little more American, and because I knew the size of my stock material better in fractional units. The ring is accented with 10 electromagnet segments that actually stand up quite a bit taller than the surface of the plexiglass. On my first arc reactor, I simply wrapped copper wire around the plexiglass ring I made, but I realized that to do it right, the wire needed to be wrapped around a core material to give it more volume. I trimmed off some of the curvature on my plexiglass torus to give my electromagnet cores an easy place to seat. The cores would be made from 2 sheets of plywood stacked to create a 1 cm thick slab from which I would mill out a U-shaped channel. This piece would then be cut into smaller segments. Moving inward, you have a circular frame with some sort of black oxide coating and capsule-shaped cutouts. Something like this would be particularly annoying to fabricate by hand, but with a CNC it's pretty trivial. I noticed that in the movie version there are also 3 strips that project inward to support a silver ring. Since I only had 2 weekends before Comic Con to finish this project, I opted to make this assembly out of a single piece. There are a series of concentric rings on the movie arc reactor that are arranged in a conical configuration. To recreate this, I would wind rings of varying diameters using square copper wire and stack them on a series of steps. The center of the arc reactor should be a circle of wire mesh. You could purchase a piece from your favorite material supply store and cut it to size, or potentially MacGyver something from plumbing parts. I didn't feel like taking a trip to Home Depot or spending money in general, so I just decided to punch a bunch of holes out in a piece of ABS and spray paint it to look shiny. It was my one moment of weakness and laziness. To evenly illuminate the arc reactor, you need to do 2 things. The first is to offset your LEDs so they aren't shining directly through the clear plexiglass, and the second is to use a diffuser. I decided to use a second piece of plexiglass for the diffuser and mill a chamfer around the perimeter to catch and scatter light from centrally located LEDs. The bottom of the diffuser had a pocket mill in it to accommodate the LEDs and their associated circuitry. To house the arc reactor, I wanted to make a harness and enclosure that surrounded the piece. Not only would it be more movie accurate for an externally worn arc reactor, but it would contain a lot of the light spill from the design. The illumination has to be crisp and cleanly defined if you want it to look decent, especially if you're going to wear it under your shirt. Instead of shaping some sort of cylindrical shell from plastic or even metal, I opted to carve a single-piece shell that included mounting points for the arc reactor, the lights, and strap anchors from 3/4 inch plywood. By using a single piece of plywood, I could keep the cost and weight down while retaining good strength. In order to clean up would probably be a very messy nest of wires, I thought this project would be a good opportunity to try making my own circuit board. I sketched up a design that would put positive power on an outside ring and negative on an inner ring. 10 LEDs would go around the board with an 11th being placed in the center facing up. An extra pair of holes was put in to connect the board to an external power source. Super primitive, but at the time I didn't know how to use a circuit board design program. By the way, if you know of one that's particularly friendly for designing boards with weird shapes, please let me know in the comments down below. After sketching out all of my designs, selecting materials, and then CADing everything up so I could finalize their dimensions, I started the build process. The main torus and diffuser were cut from a single sheet of 7/32 inch acrylic. The inner support frame was 1/8 inch black acrylic because it needed to be opaque. In hindsight, I should have run a finishing pass over it. One of my friends commented that the machining marks made it look 3D printed. I should have also painted the center ring silver to break up the monotony of black ABS. For the copper rings, I machined circular discs to wind the wire around. These were undersized by about 1/16 of an inch to account for springback. The supporting steps were machined from my acrylic stock only because wood tends to misbehave at the thicknesses I was trying to achieve. The 10 electromagnet cores were manually milled from a length of stacked plywood. Controlling the process by hand wasted the least amount of material and saved me some time on the computer. I milled the U-shaped channel first before turning the stock over and milling a shallow recess for copper wires every half inch or so. I then separated these segments with a cutoff wheel. After a quick coat of spray paint, I glued them onto the plexiglass ring and wrapped 22 gauge copper wire around them. The diffuser was one of the pieces I had to process in Meshcam. Using the geometric center as the origin, I created 2 separate programs, making sure to use generously sized supports since I wasn't going to remove the piece from my stock until all the features were cut. The chest harness was modeled in 3D and also run through Meshcam. This piece took a long time to machine because of the large pocket that had to be made. A faster way to do this would have been to fuse 2 different pieces together, a thin backplate and a thicker ring created using through cuts. I painted the entire thing with silver spray paint before switching over to a light coat of black. I then sanded the edges to reveal a tiny bit of the silver again. On the inside of the chest piece, I coated the walls with foil tape, not so much to create the illusion that it was metal, but to reflect light back at the arc reactor. Assembly of the non-electrical bits was completed using a combination of crazy glue and double-sided foam tape. And a bunch of magnets. My crude circuit board was carved using my 45-degree V-bits, with the through holes being hand-drilled. It worked well enough, although there were a couple things that could be improved. For one, I didn't carve out distinct rings around my through holes, and this meant that heat and solder were wicked away from my joint, meaning I had to apply more of each in order to create a secure connection. Also, the large amount of copper remaining tinted the translucent parts of the arc reactor, pushing everything into an almost steampunk color palette. I soldered a USB cable to my LED array board to connect it to my Scotch tape power supply, although I guess I could have used any old 5-volt power pack like a cell phone charger. After stitching together a few pieces of nylon webbing and Velcro, I had a completed arc reactor. It survived Comic-Con intact and caused me almost no discomfort wearing it for 12 hours straight. Still, I'm already thinking of potential improvements, but they'll have to wait because that's it for this video. I want to thank you all very much for watching, and I'll be back in a few weeks with 1 of 2 video ideas. I'm not sure which will be completed first, but I promise they'll be interesting. My Twitter feed over the next few weeks will probably give away what I have planned. Also, you can message me questions and stuff on Twitter if you don't want to hunt through my mediocre website for contact information.